Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are continuing on with the Swords of X event. This time we are into part 5, and we are picking up with the Marauders, specifically Storm. And I like the way this goes down. Initially, this kind of thing opens up with Storm meeting with Kitty Pryde, who, of course, Kitty Pryde is more or less the leader of the Marauders team. And the whole idea with Storm is she's currently struggling with the fact that she has to basically acquire her own sword. That Storm is one that has to grab one of the swords, specifically a sword from Wakanda. And this is not something as easily said or easily done as it is said, right? Because Kitty Pryde kind of offers her aid and Storm says, no, this is something that I have to do on my own, right? And the reason for this is given to us in a little bit of the history here in Wakanda itself. What we're basically given here is this idea that in the early days of Wakandan history, one of the things that we're told is that in the early days of Wakanda, when vibranium first showed up there, the people didn't really know what to make of it, right? They didn't really know what to make of this great mound, this giant asteroid composed of vibranium that landed on Earth. But when Wakandans eventually moved or really kind of settled in the territory and started focusing and kind of building their empire around vibranium, it originated with the creation of what was called the Skybreaker. And this was basically a sword that was the first weapon crafted out of vibranium, which basically crushed the enemies that were going against Wakanda. The benefit of this came in the recognition of the potential this sword had, specifically what vibranium had. And so Wakandans began studying vibranium more and more. And the more they studied it, the more they realized how unique it was among other metals across the face of the earth. This led to the desire for vibranium, which led to countries and so on willing to pay top dollar to get their hands on it. And by being able to pay or being so willing to pay so much money for it, this is how Wakanda rose to prominence. That because vibranium was so expensive, Wakanda used these resources to fund the building of their cities. They used this money to fund the education of its people, that kind of thing. It's a pretty genius idea in terms of how it works. But more so than that, the Skybreaker is passed on from chief to chief. But more so, and what's really important here, is the Skybreaker is kind of a symbol of the Wakandan people, right? It's their equivalent of like the Holy Bible for Christianity, right? It's their religious concept, something that you simply just don't mess with. Or maybe the cross is something more. That's probably a better example. But the long and short of this is Storm basically shows up to Wakanda itself, right? Now, T'Challa's kind of out doing T'Challa stuff, doing Black Panther stuff, right? He's just doing his Black Pantherly duties, and it takes him away from Wakanda temporarily. And so she ends up meeting with Shuri and the Queen Mother. And one of the unspoken things about the history of Storm here is that, as most of you guys know, Storm was married to T'Challa at one point in time, right? He basically nullified their marriage, I think, during the events of Avengers versus X-Men, but they really haven't been married ever since, right? Their relationship is a little stronger than it used to be, and they're kind of getting back onto good terms to a degree, but marriage doesn't really seem anything that's going to be happening anytime soon. And we get this really succinct, kind of explanation here, which is one of the things that I like about Vita Ayala, is he explains it in a way to where it's it's done really clearly, right? And really easily. When Queen Mother asks, what in the world's going on? The response to Storm is, okay, so Apocalypse had his 4 horsemen. They were basically banished to this place called Araco, and they eventually formed an army. They invaded Otherworld, and by accessing Otherworld, they want to lead this army into the rest of the multiverse, starting with our universe, and kill us all. Done. The plot to X of Swords. That's that's the entire gist of it. And it's cool, right? This is one of the reasons why I like it when there are other tie-ins to Jonathan Hickman's story, right? Because a lot of you guys know Hickman, he's an amazing writer. I love him to death, right? I love the work he does, but he can sometimes make his stories a little over confusing in terms of how he writes. And it's easier when somebody else kind of looks at it and then just breaks it down in a more digestible way, right? Because it's very easy to get caught up in everything that Hickman's doing, because not everything gets explained right off the bat. So it kind of leaves you sort of wondering a little bit. But the cool thing about this is that when Storm tells them that this is a potential threat to the world, the response of Wakanda is, then we'll assemble an army, right? We will make an army and we will help you fight alongside this battle. And Storm's idea is, no, I can't necessarily do that. I need a weapon, specifically a weapon from Wakanda, one with history. And so that's when you start getting things like the Nation Maker, the Panther Claws, the King's Mercy, right? These different swords that different weapons that Black Panther have used over the course of the entire history of Wakanda. But Storm yet again turns this down and says, no, I need the Skybreaker. And that's when the response is, that's not possible. That's not something that we can just give you, right? We can't just hand you this weapon over. It could lead to disaster. Our people would riot, right? Because it would be Wakanda giving away its most religious figure. That more, and it's kind of interesting, the more that Marvel covers the history of Wakanda, the more they involve Wakanda in the rest of the goings on and crossovers and whatnot, the more you learn about Wakanda's culture. And so we get this explanation here that because the Skybreaker is such an important figure in the history of Wakanda, Wakanda, right? It was the weapon that was used to solidify the Wakandan nature, that is not something you just give a person, right? It's like the Declaration of Independence or the United States Constitution. You don't just hand it over to somebody else, right? This is something that you keep protected under lock and key, and that the belief, the faith of the Wakandan people is so revered in terms of this Skybreaker sword that if the Wakandan royal family were to simply give it to somebody, people would revolt. And so the ultimate statement of Storm is, I can't have any sword but that. But, you know, where Queen Mother says, you know, simply wait for Black Panther to return, right? Wait for T'Challa to return, plead your case to him, and he will be the one to make the final decision. Until then, you are welcome to stay here as an honored guest. And Storm, of course, accepts. Now, at that point, we switch over to her private quarters, which looks like it has an amazing view. And then she, of course, is met by Shuri. Now, this is something that Marvel doesn't really discuss too much. And it kind of sucks because seeing it now is really cool. With Storm being the wife of Black Panther at one point in time, the wife of T'Challa, we never really got a lot of exploration in terms of her relationship with Shuri. It's one of these things where the relationship between them is that they're very much sisters, right? And they're very close to each other. They have a lot of history there. And it wasn't necessarily history insofar as Storm's involvement outside of Black Panther. It was simply that she was married to him and the two of them kind of spent time together, right? When Shuri became the Black Panther in the aftermath of T'Challa stepping down prior to the events of Doom War, Storm didn't really seem to have a lot of involvement in Shuri's time as Black Panther. But that didn't necessarily take away from Shuri's perception of her. A lot of that was really more because Shuri didn't want anybody else involved, right? I mean, even with Black Panther, she took his counsel lightly. She wanted to kind of prove herself, right? That she could do it on her own. That's kind of what she was shooting for. Ultimately ended up costing her life, but nonetheless, you know, I guess better to go down under that circumstance than any other. But the important thing is they have this kind of conversation, and she again kind of reiterates this position. There are people in Wakanda who are literally just looking for a reason to get rid of us, right? Every single day, they're looking for a reason to oust us because they consider us to be too forward thinking, too progressive, that we're not, you know, really kind of latched down and allowing ourselves to be held back by tradition, right? We're not living in the past, essentially. And so if we were to give you this sword, they would use that as a reason to create revolt. And not even my mother, the Queen Mother, and not even T'Challa would be able to talk these individuals down, that a revolt would inevitably happen. Could we quash it? Yes, but it would cost lives in the process. But the ultimate result of this is they end up hitting a stalemate. That Shuri doesn't really side with Storm and say, okay, fine, we'll find a way in for you. But Storm doesn't really ally with Shuri and say, yeah, you're right, it really is too much to ask, I should be on my way. Instead, it's just kind of like, you know, wait for T'Challa to get here, and Storm's idea is, I can't, right? I can't wait for this. And so she ends up, of course, donning her X-Men uniform and then taking to the skies in Wakanda. Now, at this point, we kind of get a little bit of an explanation in terms of what this whole deal is, right? And it sort of bounces back and forth between what Storm's doing at the moment and what's happening. Now, because you can obviously tell what Storm's doing, let's kind of run over this history a little bit while you guys are checking that out. But the idea is that the Temple of the Heart of Wakanda is kind of like its most revered place, right? It's its most sacred place. I don't recall if this runs part and parcel with the necropolis, but the point is that Black Panther, T'Challa basically says the sword itself is a symbol of the spirit of Wakanda, right? It's what it means to be a Wakandan. And it is never, ever, ever to be taken from Wakandan soil, right? It's like taking the heart of the country, the heart of the nation. You just don't do it, right? That if you take that, it would be like killing Wakanda, right? More so than that, as Black Panther takes her through there, as T'Challa took her through there. This, of course, happened back during the days of Civil War, basically the Civil War event. At least we assume it does, right? Because that's when they got married. That T'Challa says, like, if you're going to be my wife, it's important that you understand the true history and culture of Wakanda. But notice this, one of the things that T'Challa does is he doesn't tell her everything. But what he says is that here, this facility is under surveillance 24 hours by priests. And so while Storm's able to use her power over weather to create lightning that'll take down power to the place, and it takes about 30 minutes for it to reboot, that there are still analog security here, right? There's still guys, there's still people walking around. Now understand, these guys know how to fight. They're able to kind of fight back, right? They need more than like, or they're able to do more than like use guns, essentially. That these guys are trained as some of the most prodigious fighters in all of, in the Marvel universe, right? On Earth. They're there to protect the Swordbreaker. Of what use would they be if they were not highly prodigious fighters? But as good as they are, Storm is better. Now, this is also partly because she's able to get the upper hand and sneak up on them, but even with the knockdown, drag-out fight between the two, Storm's able to overcome. And this comes from a variety of different sources, right? It comes from Storm's youth, where she was taught how to fight during her time as a thief. It comes from Storm's time on the X-Men, when she was the wife of Black Panther and was taught various forms of martial arts by some of his best fighters, the Dora Milaje. These are the kind of things that where she gained her experience from, right? So she really is a highly prodigious fighter. The problem with this is that once she accesses Skybreaker with the intention of replacing it with a fake sword, that before she can grab it, the fake sword's blown out of her hand. And the reason why is because Shuri's there. And Shuri suspected this is exactly what Storm would do. That Storm would take this need and she would say, I cannot wait. I cannot wait for T'Challa to get here or anything along those lines. Now, the fight between the two is pretty intriguing. And one of the things to easily overlook about Shuri is how good she is at fighting. If she was going to become the Black Panther, she had to first and foremost be the leader of her armies, right? To be the commander of all the Wakandan armies. And none of the members of the Wakandan army would respect a Black Panther who couldn't fight. But the idea here is that the two of them are able to fight pretty closely. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that Storm is not really looking to kill Shuri. If she was, she would just shut her down entirely using her powers. But again, because Shuri has been Black Panther, she's one of the best fighters in all of Wakanda and easily on par with Storm. And so kind of going back and forth, you end up having Shuri who manages to overtake Storm and then says like, this is it. I'm going to take you with me to the palace and together we're going to speak with T'Challa, right? So notice this, Shuri's response isn't, I'm taking you back to the palace and we're going to throw you in jail because you obviously tried to steal from us. There's still respect there. There's still love and kindness there, right? She's not seeing her as somebody who betrayed Wakanda, even if it's true, because the case of Storm is so extreme and Shuri knows that Storm would not absolutely do this unless she felt like she had no other choice, right? That's what we're kind of looking at here. But Storm ultimately ends up overempowering Shuri and then replacing the sword with a fake one and then effectively leaving. But as soon as she does, she's met by the arrival of T'Challa, right? T'Challa immediately shows up and says, why are you doing this, right? Now T'Challa shows up here with his personal guard. These guys are not to be trifled with. These guys and the Dora Milaje, all T'Challa has to do is just like give the thumbs down or just say, take her. And like they will overpower her, right? Like they will overpower her before she can use her powers. That's how good these guys are. They are wildly capable. Now Storm is super powerful. She is Omega level, but also keep in mind, Black Panther knows how to neutralize his wife. If this was anybody else, Storm would overcome them and that would be the end of it. But being married to her and knowing her as he does, it would not take long for Black Panther to take her down, right? That's just kind of the way that is. And that's one of the things where he says like, why would you do this? Like I would have done this. Like if you had asked me, I would have given you this sword. Like my, Queen Mother told me everything that's going on. If you had asked, I would have given you this. All you had to do was just wait. And that's where it really kind of breaks down the relationship between the two, because ultimately they don't trust each other. And that's the biggest problem. That sure, Black Panther trusts her insofar as he would have given her this, but ultimately Storm doesn't trust him, right? She doesn't trust that he would have given her this weapon and knowing, and the whole time knowing what discourse or what kind of discord it might cause among his people. She didn't trust him on that. And rightfully so, right? Because Black Panther has consistently made himself a guy who would put his people first. And so it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense that in the face of all that, consistently kind of maintaining that position, that he would suddenly change his mind. And not only change his mind, give her the most symbolic weapon of his people, right? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense that he would suddenly do that. But ultimately, he just ends up letting her leave. And the reason why is because she says, if I do not leave here with this sword, we are all going to die, right? Like, understand, I would not do this unless I absolutely have to. You know me, you are married to me, you know the kind of person that I am. The fact that I would come here and I would defy the request of your mother to wait until you return, even if it only would have been a couple hours, for the purpose of going in there and stealing your most sacred weapon and leaving, you have to know that it's a serious deal. And that's when he says, let her go. But in response, he says, destroy the gate, right? Destroy the Krakoan gate. Like Krakoa has lost its ability to kind of sneak in and out as they see fit, right? There was a measure of trust that's been lost here. And so if Krakoans, if mutants are going to come back here, then they're going to come back here through the normal channels. They're going to request that we allow them in. We will either honor or deny that request, and then we'll meet them as we would any ambassador from any other country anywhere in the world. Storm, you lost that privilege. No more special rights for you, right? No more special privileges for you. And so Storm ultimately ends up making her way back to Krakoa. She takes her place on the panel alongside Magic and Wolverine, and that's where we are, right? And that brings an end to this story. So I think it's good. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Court. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.